kind of wish I would have known about this news back in October when this probably would have been a bit more appropriate to do. But then again, every year I always tend to do at least one belated October video in November. So I guess it's this one this year. But yeesh, let's get into this. Hello, this is Daniel Mart back again. I am an actor and filmmaker based out of South Florida, and for this video, I'm going to be talking about this whole Terrifier lawsuit that's popped off in the past week. Yeah, for those who don't know, Catherine Cochran, who was one of the actresses in the original Terrifier 1 movie, the one that came out 10 years ago in 2015, she is suing the producers of Terrifier for several reasons. So yeah, for those who don't know, Catherine Cochran specifically, she played Dawn in the original Terrifier movie. To make it more simple, she is the girl who got sawed in half naked in the movie. You know, it's the scene from Terrifier. It's the thing that basically made Terrifier, outside of Art the Clown himself, which was a huge contributor, don't get me wrong, but outside of Art the Clown himself, it's the scene that made Terrifier that made everybody want to know, like, wait, what happened in that movie? You're telling me who got killed? Like, what? That's the scene. Like, let's be completely honest. Let's not mince words about it. Let's not joke around about it. That's the scene that made Terrifier. Yes, Art the Clown had appeared in stuff even before that. All Hallows Eve, which was like a short film, I believe it was like a short film inside an anthology movie, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, it got developed further into Terrifier, and then it spun off, and then we did Terrifier 2 and Terrifier 3, and you know, then he appeared in an Ice Nine Kills song, because Ice Nine Kills does a song for every single horror movie, and apparently now Joker as well, so go figure. So that's where we're at right now. So what specifically is Catherine Cochran suing them over? It essentially boils down to two things that she's suing them over. One of them is royalties. She has not been paid properly, to my understanding. She has not been paid properly under the agreement that she made with them for the original Terrifier. So that's one thing that she's suing. And the second thing that she's suing for is her basically appearing nude, or lack of consent for appearing nude in the original Terrifier movie. Now, there is one other thing that I want to clear up before I get into the two big things, because it seems that a lot of people are confounding the two or combining the two things. It's like, no, this is two separate issues. And that's the NDA itself. So in the NDA itself, it states that she can't talk about this for 2 years. So from 2015 to 2017, she is not allowed to talk about whatever deals she had, specifically the 1% deal with the SAG-AFTRA deal, which we'll get to in a bit. And a lot of people are saying, oh wait, if this deal is running for 2 years, why is she suing 10 years later? It's like, no, the lawsuit, or better said, the NDA, the contract, the 2-year limit is for the NDA. In regards to the fact that she can't talk about this SAG-AFTRA deal for 2 years, which is at 2017. That's what it applies to. It doesn't apply to everything else that we're about to discuss here. I just want to clear that up very fast, because it seems that a lot of people are conflating the two and saying, hey, if this is a 2-year contract, why is she suing 10 years earlier? So I just want to kind of get that out of the way before I get into the meat and potatoes of the rest of this thing, because that's a very important thing. I've seen in a few other publications and a few other people who are discussing this, that's the main sticking point where they're discussing, like, she has no foundation per se to sue on if her contract already ended because of this 2-year deal. It's like, no, that's just the NDA. And even aside from that, given the fact that she's in the middle of lawsuits, or I guess she's starting a lawsuit, better said, the NDA kind of becomes null and void because of discovery at that point. And that's on top of the fact that Dark Age Cinema, seemingly, is the main main person, or entity, I guess in this case, or company in this case, who, since they did not keep up their end of the bargain, that NDA, to a certain extent, now becomes null and void. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. So who exactly is she suing? Let me just get that out of the way too. She's suing Damien Leone and Phil Falcone, which Damien Leone, he is the main director, force behind Art the Clown, behind Terrifier, and Phil Falcone, which is the main producer behind the original Terrifier. He's the one who gave the initial seed money for the original Terrifier, which, by the way, the original Terrifier was only made for $35,000. That's how cheap that movie was, which will be a main factor once we get into this whole SAG-AFTRA deal. And then, so those are the two individuals that she's suing, Damien Leone and Phil Falcone. And then on top of that, she's suing Dark Age Cinema LLC, Fuzz on the Lens Productions LLC, and this one I find kind of funny, Art the Clown LLC. I just didn't realize that Art the Clown was, I guess, its own LLC. So I'm like, she's quite literally suing Art the Clown. I just find that a little bit funny, if I'm being honest with you. Like as one of those things, I don't expect like Michael Myers LLC. You know what I mean? You know, or like, I don't know, Freddy Krueger LLC, or Ghostface LLC, or Chucky LLC. Like, I just don't expect that in my head. So like, I was kind of like taken aback when I saw Art the Clown LLC. What the heck? But yeah, that's aside the point. One other thing I do want to point out before we get into the meat and potatoes of all this is the fact that yes, Damien Leone and Phil Falcone, aside from Damien Leone himself being the director and writer of Terrifier, the creator of Terrifier, and then being the producers of Terrifier, I also want to point out, because it is going to be relevant later on in the story, I also want to point out that Phil Falcone, he was also the makeup artist for the original Terrifier movie, and Damien Leone, he was the special makeup effects artist for Terrifier. So yeah, Phil Falcone, he was the makeup effects artist, and Leone, he was a special makeup effects artist. So basically, what does that mean, since that's a very similar title? Makeup effects artist essentially boils down to like help make small makeup jobs. So like think of like bruises on the face, or like scratches, or bruises, scratches, cuts on the face, or on the body, whatever. That's generally speaking what a makeup effects artist will do. Whereas a special makeup effects artist, they are the ones who handle more stuff like prosthetics, or like bigger stuff in regards to like the scene. So again, in the case of the nude scene, which we'll get to more so later, Leone, he was responsible of cast modes and like the actual prosthetics and like the actual application when the saw goes through the body, like that type of stuff. That's what he was more concerned with. Whereas Phil Falcone, he was just making sure that she looked bruised up, she had her cuts. Primarily that will be their individual jobs. It does become important later on once we get into the lawsuit. So again, she is suing them for two different things. One of them is the money that she has yet to receive based on the deal that they originally agreed upon. So that's one thing that they're suing over. And then the second thing that they're suing over is the actual proper consent of the nude scene and how filming for that nude scene basically went about. So let me start off with what I'd say is the easier-ish thing to explain, which is this SAG-AFTRA deal where right now she's getting screwed out of her royalties. So yeah, SAG-AFTRA deal. First off, my first red flag on this is the fact that it says SAG-AFTRA deal, as has been clearly made plain as day in the past couple years. SAG-AFTRA does not really care for their actors. Thanks a lot, Fran Drescher and Duncan Crabtree, you selfish, money-hungry idiots. Sadly, actually no, not sadly, goodly in this case, they had nothing to do with this. Yeah, and in this case, this is actually SAG-AFTRA actually doing their jobs like they're supposed to and not screwing over their actors. This is actually a case where SAG-AFTRA is actually the hero in this case, in part because Fran Drescher and Duncan Crabtree are not involved, thank God. But in all seriousness, so what is this SAG-AFTRA deal that they actually did? So because of the fact that Terrifier, the original Terrifier, was so cheap to make, again, $35,000, that was the initial budget, period. Because it was so cheap to make, they needed to make a specific deal with Catherine Cochran because she herself was a SAG-AFTRA affiliated actor. And again, SAG is the union. So what deal did they make? They specifically made the Screen Actors Guild Employment of Performers for ultra low budget film agreement. That's the agreement that they did. Basically what it boils down to is that she was paid $100 per filming day with the knowledge that she'll get 1% cashback or 1% royalty afterwards if the film is successful and has made enough money, has made back its money afterwards. And she'll get 1% of all merchandise and profits and anything made from the sequels. That's basically the deal that they made. So more specifically, this is how it's worded here in the lawsuit. A 1% of the profits from and or related to the Terrifier motion picture and any future Terrifier motion pictures, as well as 1% of the profits from any Terrifier related merchandise. Initially, she didn't see any money because, of course, the film, again, is $35,000. That's how much it was made for. She didn't expect to see almost any money initially, realistically speaking. So initially, she wasn't really suspicious as to why she hadn't seen any money at all, and she didn't really see any money for a good amount of time, up until 2017. From the looks of it, she did receive small amounts of money based on the merchandise, which keep in mind, this is before Art the Clown really blew up. It's kind of insane to say, because a lot of us kind of imagine falsely that Art the Clown blew up almost instantly, but not really. He didn't really blow up that instantly, all things considered. Art the Clown, I mean, it took, I would say it took a bit of time for him to become really, really popular in the grand scheme of things. When you think about it, the first Terrifier, again, came out in 2015. Terrifier 2 did not come out to like, I think 2020, 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Like, yes, we had heard rumblings about it beforehand, but it didn't really come out till 2021, 2022. And if I'm not mistaken, Terrifier 3 came out, like, what, last year? It took some time for it to really become popular. Shortly after the release of Terrifier 1, and I want to say this is on the cusp of Terrifier 2 being announced as well, from what it seems like. But during that time, Leone further agreed in writing to provide Cochran with a share of 1% of all net sales generated from Terrifier-related merchandise. So that deal was still in place. So again, when I mentioned earlier about the 2-year thing with the NDA, that's where a lot of people are confusing this stuff, specifically with this deal. That 2-year agreement, again, was only for the NDA, and just the NDA, not this deal that they had with SAG-AFTRA. Again, that's why I want to clear this up. I wanted to clear that up from the beginning, because again, a lot of people are conflating those two things together. Whereas like, oh, I mean, if she signed it, that's how it should go. It's like, no, again, those are two separate things. Yes, technically under the same contract, but the 2-year limit only applies to one aspect of the contract, not the whole contract. So I just wanted to really clarify that before moving on. In December 2022, she started to receive sporadic royalty payments. However, the memo lines on the checks were cryptic as to exactly what the payment was for. Some examples that she gave include Dist, T1, Q1 Epic, or just merchandise, and there's no accompanying accounting statements reflecting how the payment figure was derived. So, again, this is during that time. This is when Terrifier 2, I believe, would have come out by this point, or right before it came out by this point. This is where she started seeing some money, but again, like I just said, the payments were very sporadic and really didn't explain how the amount was gotten, which that is one thing I'm just generally curious how she would have known. I'm imagining this as she's just written a check and maybe it's sent directly into her bank account or in the mail. Like, that's one of those things where I am just a little bit curious as to, like, how would they, I guess they could attach some kind of memo in regards to, like, hey, this is how we got it we figured how much you're owed this month, you know? That's the one thing I am just questioning how that would work out personally. But I will say, too, at the same time, if you're doing this sporadically and if you're just giving weird memos, like, again, Q1 Epic, Dist, T1, or just merchandise, at that point, I would start getting a little bit sus. The next thing that happens is that Terrifier 2 does come out. And it says here, the success of Terrifier 2 and renewed interest in the original Terrifier seemed to correspond with the commencement of her royalty payments, so she did not suspect she was being cheated. Okay, so this would have happened after, so December 2022, okay, so that would have happened after the release of Terrifier 2. She starts getting paid after Terrifier 2022. Terrifier 2022. Terrifier 2. Too many twos, my bad. But yeah, she starts getting paid after Terrifier 2 comes out, but again, it's very sporadic, and it's very nonsensical from what it seems. I think to a certain degree, because it does discuss this in the actual court document, and to a certain degree, it does talk about how Kathleen Cochran, she was hopefully optimistic, like almost to a naive degree from what it seems like, in that the producers were gonna keep their word. I'm still gonna say this naively optimistic, hopefully optimistic in a good sense, but then again, you also have to remember the original Terrifier did not do that. Let's be honest, all things considered, Terrifier 1 did not make bank in the traditional sense, and even then, when it did make bank, it wasn't really an instant bank. It didn't make bank for a couple of years, so all things considered. Remember, Terrifier 1 for a long time was a cult classic, essentially. To a certain degree, it still kind of is a cult classic. It's really Terrifier 2 when anybody would have properly seen any kind of bank based on the Terrifier name, based on Art the Clown and that property. And then they discuss some stuff that happened after Terrifier 3 was released. She, Kathleen Cochran, stopped receiving film royalties in July of 2024. To date, here's how much she's made so far for everything based on Terrifier, which I find crazy. To date, Cochran has only received a total of approximately $6,408.26 in merchandise royalty payments, with an aggregated back-end royalty payment only totaling approximately $8,341.61. So, on top of that, when you do the math, she's made, first off, more money on merchandise for Terrifier than the actual movies itself. Let's round everything up a little bit. or to the nearest hundredth, so to speak. So she's made 6,400 in merchandise, which I'm kind of curious if that includes the song with Iceland Kills. Now I think about it. So she's made 6,400 on merchandise alone, and she's made what, another 1,300, give or take, on the movies. That seems kind of wild. Now, part of the reason why this lawsuit is happening is because they are trying to clear up what movie or movies she's supposed to be getting money from. Again, if we go back to the original part that I mentioned at the beginning of this portion, 1% of profits from and or related to the Terrifier motion picture and any future Terrifier motion pictures, as well as 1% of the profits from any Terrifier related merchandise. I think the fact that it specifically said, and any future Terrifier motion pictures, I think that gives her enough of a leeway, theoretically speaking, to say, hey, I deserve money for from Terrifier 2 and from Terrifier 3. And again, it's not really a crazy amount. It's only 1%, all things considered. And that's on top of the fact that her likeness is used in Terrifier 2 on top of all that. She should have made some money, even if you want to disregard Terrifier 3 for a moment, because she technically did appear in Terrifier 2, I think as a photograph, which is something that they said in the actual lawsuit details themselves. She is still entitled to a certain degree of that money, because yes, that is a thing. By the way, this is for filmmaking in general, for Hollywood filmmaking in general. If you see a picture, like a missing poster or whatever, like, I want to say Truth or Dare. I don't know why that's the first example that pops into my mind, but Truth or Dare, there's a scene in Truth or Dare where the cop is telling the group, is like, hey, yeah, we've seen this before, where another group was playing Truth or Dare, and we can't find them now because we assume they're all dead, and they show all their like headshots and missing picture posters, whatever. Those actors, because their picture was used in the film, even though they physically did not appear in the film, just their pictures, they still got paid. Granted, it wouldn't have been a great amount. It wouldn't have been a vast amount. It probably would have been like a couple $100s, but they still got paid for appearing in the film. So it's one of those things, even Terrifier 2, at the very least, she would have been paid because her picture appeared in the film. Especially because she's a SAG actor. Like, that still falls within SAG lines on top of that. Now, here's something that I find very just crappy. I'm not gonna, like, there's a lot of crappy stuff in regards to both sections of the lawsuits, but I'm gonna touch upon it more towards the end, because I do think there is somebody more specific you can blame, but this is like the first sign of who you can blame. When Cochran confronted Falcone and Leone about the status of her royalty payments and obtaining appropriate backups, she was brushed off, with Leone stating that Falcone handles all the accounting matters, and then an aggressive and defensive response from Falcone saying he purportedly doesn't keep records. That sounds very bad. First off, under no circumstances should you not be keeping records. Even though I'm not a filmmaker anymore, I still have all my contracts from all my original films. From all the films I've produced, all the films I've directed, all the NDAs, all the contracts, even though payment was not involved, because I'm even more low budget than this. Despite that, I have all my contracts lined up in case anybody needs to see them. I have contracts from every single film I've done. In my case, I'm just talking about like your basic standard NDAs, like, hey, don't talk about the film until it comes out. I'm talking about your standard NDAs. Now you're talking about budgets. Now you're talking about money. How do you not keep a record of financial statements? How do you not keep a record of, hey, this is like the deal we've made, this, that, and the other? I'm going to touch upon this after this next bit with the nude stuff and the nude consent stuff. And I'm going to say this right now. It's not to excuse whatever Damien Leone has done or may have done, okay? From all accounts, he's a nice guy, but, you know, just because you're a nice guy doesn't mean you haven't screwed up in the past. In this case, it does seem like this is one of those major screw-ups he's done in the past that he now has to take accountability for, okay? But there's a lot of stuff here that's said about Phil Falcone specifically that makes me very wary of him as a person and as a business partner. This being a major sign of that. Damien Leone was a producer of Terrifier by proxy of him being the director and having originated the concept of Art the Clown all the way back in All Hallows Eve. On top of that, if you look at the credits of Terrifier, of any of the Terrifier movies, Damien Leone, he's also usually credited in like 5 or 6 different roles between being director, producer, editor, makeup effects artist, special effects, this, that, and the other. Falcone, he also has that too, but he's the major money contributor to the Terrifier movies, especially the first one. Leone, yes, he may have contributed some money, but not to the extent that Falcone contributed. And with what I'm going to discuss next with the whole nude consent stuff, again, not to excuse anything that Damien Leone has done. Not to excuse, because I do think he does need to take accountability on his own part as well. But it really seems like Phil Falcone is really the main person who's being shady about all of this stuff. Because now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this whole nude consent stuff and the filming, trials and tribulations, and this, that, and the other. Because I think this is where it really gets very gross. Now, here's the thing, too. A lot of people are kind of clowning on Catherine Cochran because, like, oh, she didn't realize she had to appear nude. Did she not read the script? It's not necessarily that. It's not that she didn't know she had to appear nude. It's not that. This goes back to SAG-AFTRA. That deal that they had, that they made at the beginning, the Screen Actors Guild Employment of Performer for ultra low budget film agreement, because she was going to appear nude, they needed to get actual written consent, like a contract. They needed to get written consent from Catherine Cochran, basically explaining that yes, she knows she's going to appear nude, agreeing to appear nude, and then in that contract, in that document, you also needed Leone and Falcone needed to write out, hey, this is what's going to happen in this nude scene. This is why she's nude. This is what's going to happen. This, that, and the other. And aside to that, it's just the overall filming conditions for Terrifier. Now, look, I'm going to be honest with you. If you look at the original Terrifier, again, it's made, I don't know, the hell of a shoestring budget, $35,000. Terrifier, the original one, it's made to look grimy. It's made to look, you know, just super grindhouse. And let's be honest, given that such a low budget, certain precautions are not going to be taken. That's just filmmaking for you, especially for a horror movie. That's just filmmaking for you. So here's what they have to say about all this. So in terms of the filming conditions, the shoots were under extreme conditions, including long hours and below freezing temperatures in condemned buildings, all without heat and some without bathrooms. Right off the bat, that's a really crappy way to film something. That seems like absolute hell. That sounds terrifying. So yeah, on top of that, it does later on in the document, it does mention a few times over that the weather specifically was 20-degree weather. So that's very cold. I'm from Miami. I can barely handle 60-degree weather. That just sounds like hell freezing over at that point at 20 degrees. So basically it comes down to, yeah, Terrifier looks like crap, and it seems like shooting that was crap as well. In terms of the actual nude scene itself, as I said before, she needed to give actual written consent, and SAG-AFTRA, the union, had to also get a description of what was actually going to go down. The nude scene, which required her to be hung upside down by her ankles for over 10 hours in below freezing temperature in a condemned building. So that's when I say they needed to describe everything, they needed to describe everything, not just how the nude scene was going to appear on film, but how they were going to film it. What were the precautions being made beforehand to make sure that this was all good? And keep in mind, this is also before intimacy coordinators were a thing. Intimacy coordinators did not really become a thing until post-Harvey Weinstein. Keep in mind, I'm pretty sure this is on the cusp of Harvey Weinstein as well. And given the fact that I'm pretty sure they shot this probably 2013, 2014, this would have been way before Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein probably popped off as Terrifier was coming out. So on top of that, like I highly doubt the idea of, oh, let's get an intimacy coordinator was an idea at this point. I do know that they had an intimacy coordinator for Terrifier 3, for the bathroom scene for that movie. I do know they had one for that one. But for this one, first Terrifier, where this is a shoestring budget, and at that point, intimacy coordinators were considered a joke. Yeah, no, they're not going to hire someone like that. Screw that. No. On top of that, they do discuss how they, for the nude scenes, it was without any real safety measures in place. Again, this is something I'm going to get into in a bit more. And again, just to go over the written consent form a bit more specifically, it says here, it required producers to obtain the informed written consent with an actress, or the actress, in this case, before filming any scenes involving nudity and or simulated sexual activity. The written consent must include a general description of the extent of the nudity and type of physical contact required in that scene. Without such consent, any film or still image involving nudity and or simulated sexual activity are de facto and de jure deemed to have been obtained without the actress's consent, and it was never obtained by any of Dark Age Cinema, Falcone Leone, or any other defendants. So that's why it's so important. It's not that Cochran didn't know she was gonna appear nude. And that's not the thing. She, of course, knew she was gonna appear nude. But it's one of those things that, despite that, you still have to agree to the fact that you're going to appear nude. You still have to give a written consent. That is still something that you need to do the paperwork properly so that everything checks out. Because in this industry, everything needs a paper trail. Everything needs proper documentation. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter if you guys agree verbally. There always needs to be a written agreement, so we all know everybody has their ducks in a row. If I'm being honest, I feel like this nude controversy could have been blown over if not for the filming conditions. And that's honestly my take on it. Because we're about to get into the filming conditions. We got into it a little bit already. But I would say the main point of this argument really should have been, I would say, for her not receiving proper payment. It's one of those things where if the filming conditions were great, if everybody was cool about it, and they just didn't get the written consent, I feel like this is something that could have been blown over. Maybe she gets an extra $1,000 or whatever because of this technicality, because they didn't get the proper paperwork. Maybe that's what would have happened, and then the main focus would have been the actual, hey, where's my money for this 1% deal? And keep in mind, it's 1%. So even then, I'm not saying it's not a lot, because it is a lot in the grand scheme of things, but compared to how much Terrifier has made, it's not really a lot. It's one of those things like, my math may be bad on this, but let's say Terrifier made $1 million. 1%, what is that? 100,000? I'm bad at math, so I don't know. You tell me. So, but like it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much. It still is a decent amount of bank, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much. So I feel like if not for this whole nude controversy, how the film was actually filmed, I think this could have been blown over. But it comes down to the filming conditions, which we're going to discuss right now, and why it's so intertwined with the nude scene, why this aspect of the lawsuit is way more of a bigger deal than I think it should be. And I'm going to be honest with you, I think because of the filming conditions, this was elevated to a proper amount of, yes, this truly is a big deal. So again, as I said before, this was shot under extreme conditions, including long hours and below freezing temperature, 20 degrees weather in the condemned buildings, all without heat and without bathrooms, some without bathrooms. Keep in mind, they're filming in multiple buildings, abandoned buildings, and I guess, if they're abandoned, why would they have a working bathroom? Now, as I said before, Falcone and Leone, aside from being the producers of this movie, and Leone being the director and writer of the movie, they also had other jobs. Falcone was, again, the makeup effects artist, and Leone was a special makeup effects artist. And again, just to differentiate the two a bit more, makeup effects artists, really, their extent really should only be to like bruises, cuts, like superficial stuff. Whereas the special makeup effects artist, that's the person who deals with prosthetics and molds and the blood and the more bigger grand scheme stuff. Because that's about to come into play right now. So when making the mold for her naked body, because of course she's not actually going to be sawed in half, it's going to be a plastic dummy in this case. These were the procedures that went down. They were placing prosthetics with actual rat feces, which what the heck? Actual rat crap. Rat feces on Cochrane's skin, and real duct tape over her mouth. Just for the real duct tape, I was thinking about this, like, is there an alternative to duct tape in this case that they could have used? But that's just me. Further, when creating the silicone mold for Cochrane's body cast, the producers of the film required Cochrane to lie nude on a piece of plywood while she was covered with quick dry liquid silicone agent. Quick dry silicone agent is exactly what it sounds like. Those things dry up quick. I've had quick dry silicone agents on me. For Schism, I had a neck appliance where that was all quick dry liquid, essentially. I've used quick dry for blonde hair murders. When I was a makeup effects artist for the blonde hair murders, I used quick dry, and again, that was also for a neck wound. Just like the title says, it's quick and dry. It's like, it's one of those things, the second it comes out the bottle, it's practically already freezing up, so it's drying up, freezing up, so you can mold it correctly. That's how fast that is, to be honest with you. Sometimes it'll dry within the bottle itself, honestly, to be honest with you. And getting that stuff off is a pain. Sometimes, literally, if you attach it to your skin, most cases you kind of do need to do it, depending on the appliance. That's also painful. Like there's a special type of liquid that helps you remove it, like alcohol liquid that helps you remove it. Like those things, or like an oil, better said. Like those things are painful sometimes to even get off. So yeah, they applied a quick dry liquid silicone agent, and it seems to be on her body based on some of the stuff that's said after this. However, the process was done incorrectly, and the silicone dried up and essentially glued Cochrane to the plywood, requiring a long, painful process to remove that dried silicone from her body. So yeah, because usually this is applied to her body. And I'm guessing that if they were doing it, because again, this is for the cast of her nude body, and this would have gone throughout her whole body, from the neck down. Like for me, taking that off just off of my neck, it was like painful. I can just imagine throughout the whole body. And that's one of those things where I'm kind of curious, how do they incorrectly apply this? The process was done incorrectly. Like what how was the process done incorrectly, and that's one of those things I wish I would have known more details about, because Jesus, just because that sounds painful. Here's where I kind of feel like Falcone is becoming sus again. And then she goes on to say that Falcone took numerous still photographs of Cochrane's nude body while she was glued to the plywood sheets without her consent. So here's the thing: when you're a makeup artist, any type of makeup artist, there is a certain expectation where if you need to do this makeup job again in the future for like the next day, or for other scenes that continue on, for continuity, you need to take pictures so that you know how to do the makeup again. If, let's say, in scene 1, in the middle of scene 1, let's say I have to get a blood splatter across my face, okay, now that blood splatter has to be there for scenes 2, 3, and 4. And we have to make sure that it's applied in the same manner, in the correct way, throughout those scenes. Because I may not be doing scene 2, maybe I'm only filming scenes 1 and 3 today, and scenes 2 and 4, I'm filming them 2 weeks from now. We have to make sure that that blood splatter is continuous, so that there's no continuity error. In those cases, yes, you are expected to, the actor, you are expected to be allowed to, hey, can I take a picture for continuity's sake? But for this, respectfully, I don't see what continuity, like, the continuity is that you're making a nude body, you know? And this is for the silicone thing, so like, the idea is that you would already have the silicone cast mold after this process. So for me, there's no reason for her to have her nude picture taken. And the only thing I could kind of think of is like maybe, and I'd have to see the scene again to be honest with you, but the only thing I could think of is like if there was like a bruise or some cuts all over her body when she's nude, so that he can later go on and do those bruises again from one day to the next to the next. That's like the only thing I can think of. But in the way that she's describing it here, I'm picturing it that she's laid down on this plywood board. She's already glued to the plywood board because they incorrectly applied the quick dry, and Falcone is just randomly taking pictures. That's how I'm imagining it, to be honest with you. That's what I'm saying. Not to excuse Damien Leone's role in all this, because I do think he does bear some fault on this. But when Falcone is, in this case, acting very inappropriate by taking pictures that he realistically probably shouldn't be taking in the first place, and that's on top of the fact that he's also the one who's supposed to be keeping track of the bank records, and then not doing his job properly as a producer, especially if he's the one who's giving the bulk of the money for the movie. This paints a real bad light on Falcone. Again, not trying to excuse Damien Leone's role in this. I'm not giving him a free pass, but it makes me more suspicious of Falcone than it does Leone. Because realistically, also on top of that, let's say for whatever purpose they needed to take pictures of her nude body while she's glued to this plywood, it would really be on Leone who needs to take those pictures, not Falcone. Because again, Falcone is only the makeup effects artist, whereas Leone is the special makeup effects artist. Leone is the one who's concerned more so with the prosthetics and this actual bigger process stuff. That's where his role lies in regards to the makeup stuff. And that's on top of the fact that Leone, he's also the effects supervisor for this movie on top of that as well, more so than Falcone. On top of that, like if you look at the IMDb credits, that's Leone's role. That's one of many of Leone's roles, whereas Falcone, he doesn't have that role. He doesn't have a role under special effects or VFX or anything like that. He has nothing to do with that. So that's on top of the fact that really those pictures should have theoretically been taken by Leone, not Falcone. Either way, they're null and void because they didn't get a proper consent of nudity. You know, they still haven't gotten a proper consent of nudity, so they shouldn't have taken pictures in the first place to begin with, if we want to get technical about it. When the actual filming commenced, she recognized that she was the only female on set, which, yeah, makes sense, I'm not gonna lie, sad, but that's kind of expected. Falcone and Leone informed Cochrane that the scene was to be done with Cochrane fully nude. However, Cochrane insisted that she be permitted to at least wear underwear during filming, to which Falcone and Leone ultimately acquiesced. So this is one of those things where, not gonna lie, I probably should have seen the scene before I made this video, but I don't remember her having underwear in the scene. I remember her being fully nude. So it's one of those things where either A, I'm just straight up misremembering, and the fact that she had an underwear in the scene, so that's on me. It could also be that in between takes, she was allowed to wear an underwear. Where it does discuss this, she was allowed to cover her in between takes. She was allowed to cover herself with a blanket, with a robe. So they do talk about that. Regardless, she's allowed to be topless. I don't like the fact that how this is worded, because it does make Falcone and Leone look bad. Again, Falcone and Leone ultimately acquiesced. Again, this comes down to them having not gotten proper written consent. Now, I think this is one of those situations where if you want, you can fault Catherine Cochrane because, like, oh, what do you mean she didn't know she was going to be nude? You know, the nature of it, this, that, and the other. I guess in that sense, you can definitely fault her. But again, there's other filming conditions here that kind of, I would say, supersedes this. Again, if she's the only woman on set here, if one of the producers is already acting very creepy towards her by taking these inappropriate pictures that go beyond even what would have been in the written contract, and just the overall filming conditions, I think this is one of those things where, like, hey, let me have some power, because this is an absolute crap show at this point. Hey, I kind of want to be in my underwears. Is that too much to ask? I feel like if the filming conditions were way better, a certain producer here did not go Loki Weinstein on the situation. I feel had that not gone down the way it went down, she probably would have been like, yeah, okay, cool, I'll appear nude. But that, again, that's not what happened. Again, I think the nude controversy of it all could honestly have been blown over had the filming conditions not been such a crap show. And keep in mind that, remember the scene, she's hung upside down. Let's get into the actual medical aspect of this and just other filming conditions of this. To mitigate pooling of blood in her head while suspended by her ankles, filming of the scene took place in 40-second increments for over 10 hours, with a platform being intermittently placed underneath Cochran and her nude body lifted by men on set to bring her horizontal. I'm gonna use a teddy bear, but keep in mind, she was hung upside down, and you know, if you're upside down for an extended period of time, you're eventually going to get lightheaded. You're eventually going to feel dizzy. So what they did, essentially, the way I'm picturing this, the way I see this, every 40 seconds they'll stop filming and they'll allow her to be right side up. The way it's worded here, I do want to know exactly what the procedure that was supposed to be followed here is, because they say here that lifted by the men on set to bring her horizontal. So I'm guessing that would be like, I mean, horizontal, that's sideways, right? So it's not, so she's going from this to like this. So that's why I'm kind of curious, like, she wasn't allowed to stand 40-second increments. That's why I'm kind of like curious as to what the procedure was supposed to be, because it also seems like they didn't follow this procedure to begin with. That's on top of the fact that this is a procedure that Cochran specifically requested. This procedure was only done as a result of Cochran's request, and had she not made this request, these safety measures would not have been taken. Yeah, duh. This procedure, however, never fully allowed the blood to properly recirculate, and it simply pooled in her head each time she was again hung upside down. Which, again, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that this procedure was not thought up by Leone or Falcone or anybody else on the production. This coming from Cochran makes sense. This makes sense that this came from the actor themselves, so that they could be safe, again, to some degree. Again, I'm still very curious as to what the procedure was supposed to be, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really seem like it was followed properly. And I'm just thinking, like, and this is me being naive, this is me being, I'll be honest, this is one of those things that I would want to know the medical aspect behind this, but like, how long does it take for blood to recirculate? I would say even in 40-second increments. If they're shooting 40-second increments, if you're held upside down, yes, the blood will pool at the bottom, at your head, but I would say even like this, like, would it not, yeah, maybe it wouldn't circulate as fast as if you're right side up. But even sideways, would it not circulate for at least some time? And that's what I'm kind of curious on from a medical standpoint. I don't know, maybe if you're a medical person, if you're a doctor, nurse, whatever, comment that down below, let me know as to the specifics of that. But that's just one of those things that I'm kind of curious from that aspect to like, how would that work out? Even then, even in between takes, she was wrapped in a blanket between takes, but over time, the blanket became so saturated with fake blood that it ceased to provide any warmth. Again, these are hellish conditions to work in, with conditions being 20 degrees, weather, and these cold abandoned buildings. It kind of makes sense after a while that, well, first off, it makes sense they would allow her to be covered up regardless. So that of course, that makes sense. That seems to be the only semblance of a procedure that they followed at the end of all this. But, you know, after a while, yeah, if you're being in this blood-filled mess, it makes sense that your blanket is eventually just gonna be bloodied, quite literally bloodied up with fake blood. That's the one thing I'm also kind of curious about, and that's, I don't know who I would ask that to, but like, I would imagine like even blankets that's still covered with blood, like, will that not provide some warmth? Like, I mean, it's saturated with blood at that point, so I guess it would be like putting a wet blanket on top of you during freezing cold temperatures. I guess that would be the proper analogy. It does seem like they did try to cover up to a certain degree. It does seem like they did try to give her warmth to a certain degree, but it wasn't enough, essentially what it boils down to. And here's another major thing in regards to all this, because the blood was pooling in her head for such a long time, over 10 hours, despite the 40-second increments, over 10 hours. This is what happened to her, medically speaking. During and for several days after filming the scene, Cochran felt ill. When she visited her doctor, she was told that she had suffered cranial swelling and eardrum damage as a result of being hung upside down for this length of time in these working conditions. So it seems like everything that happened on this set, and the way it was done, from her head being upside down for nearly 10 hours, even despite the 40-second increments, basically being held upside down over 10 hours, her being laid down horizontally, her being filming in these hellish conditions of 20-degree weather in these abandoned buildings, not being properly warmed up, this, that, and the other. I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and say there's probably not that much food on top of that. I'm gonna assume that like there's some stuff here that's not being described that probably did happen as well, and in regards to like other filming conditions, like maybe lack of food, lack of water, this and the other. I mean, they do discuss a lack of bathroom in some cases. So it seems like all of that culminates to her having actual damage, like bodily damage, and this is something we've heard in Hollywood a lot, where hey, sometimes an actor truly does suffer for their art. Ellen Burstyn for the Exorcism, she like not broke her spine, but she like dislocated something in her spine, or she when she did one of the stunts for The Exorcist, she busted up her spine, and something that's so affectionate to this day. Even me myself, I've done stuff on films where it really has quote unquote hurt me. For Quince, when I did my stunt and jumped into the pool for about a month, my ear, I couldn't hear out of this ear because it was covered with pool water. It's one of those things I actually had to go to the doctor specifically to like get that drained out. And like that's a minor thing, and that's on my own film. So like that one I can't really complain. I can't really blame anybody else but myself. And granted, I wanted to do that stunt, but in this case, like there does come a limit where the actor shouldn't suffer for their art. It's essentially what it boils down to. There's a difference between like, hey, you're doing the stunt and you accidentally get a bruise. That's one thing. Versus like, hey, I'm actually suffering a real medical setback because of what happened in this film. I'll also say there's a difference between just being an actor versus somebody who is the actor, director, producer of this project. Like for me, Quince, I can't blame anybody for my busted up ear because that was my own stunt that I did, that I wrote for my own movie that I was producing. I can't blame anybody else. Even though Jace was also a producer on that film, I can't blame him because at the end of the day, this all boils down to me. Likewise, let's say Tom Cruise. There was that stunt where he was running across a few buildings, he jumped, and he like busted up his ankle. By the way, of all the stunts for him to bust something up, it had to be one of the easiest stunts to do, go figure. But he busted up his ankle, but keep in mind, Tom Cruise, he wanted to do that stunt. He's also the producer of the Mission Impossible movies. On top of that, he's a huge force behind that. So that basically lands on him for the most part. I think because he wasn't the director and there are some other producers that are there, it may technically land on some of those other producers, but realistically that at the end of the day lands on him. And he took that like a champ, all things considered. I mean, he even hobbled away quite literally on film if you see the film. With this, where she's just a hired actor for a cheap amount for this cheap movie, this does not fall on her. Yes, she could know that there's going to be a nude scene. She could know how it's being done. But any damage, medical damage that she acquired or sustained from filming this, it really does not fall on her. It falls, again, on Falcone and Leone and whoever else are the producers of this movie. It falls on them for not keeping their actors properly safe and secure at the end of the day. That's what it boils down to. Like I said, I think this whole nude scene consent thing could have honestly really been blown over way more easily had it not been for the actual hellish filming conditions of this production. If not for that, I genuinely think that the nude scene stuff, the consent stuff, or the lack of consent could have really been blown over. Maybe they gave her a few extra $1,000 for having to deal with no consent, but that's about it. Another reason why the nude consent thing is also such a big thing is because, again, for Terrifier 1, that scene, her being sawed in half, naked, that was the one thing that this movie was known for a long time. Outside of Art the Clown himself, that was the one thing that this movie was known for a long time. And on top of that, keep in mind, she makes money not just off of the movies, not just off of Terrifiers 1, 2, and 3, but she also makes money off of the merchandise. And for Terrifier 1, her nude body was basically selling that movie like hotcakes. And that's a reason why this also became so important. So it's one of those things like the nude consent thing would still have played a factor regardless, especially because of the merchandise. But it wouldn't have been, in my opinion, it wouldn't have been such a big deal had it not been for the actual filming conditions of this movie. I think that's the one thing that's really setting this over the edge. At the end of all this, what are my thoughts? I mean, it's honestly, I'm gonna be honest, it sucks. It sucks that Catherine Cochran had to go through all this. It genuinely sucks, and I feel bad for her, and I do hope that this resolves in a proper way. I don't think this is gonna be like a Weinstein level situation. One, because it involves Terrifier. Let's just be realistic. For me, it really seems like this is something that basically people need to get their documents in check, and because that didn't happen, now they're gonna pay for it. The one thing, the real one takeaway that I would really consider here, so to speak, is really just Falcone and his role in the Terrifier franchise. One, again, my guy, you need to keep proper documentation of everything, from the nude consent to the banking statements. The fact that he straight up says that he doesn't keep records, that's a huge red flag, especially if you're the main, especially for the first Terrifier, if you are the main contributing force behind that first Terrifier movie. That's like saying, for the original Halloween, if Mustafa Akkad, if he didn't keep the proper records he needed way back when he was a major contributing force for Halloween, the original Halloween, if Mustafa had not kept records, that would have been a huge problem, because let's say, for example, Jamie Lee Curtis, for whatever reason, she wanted to sue Carpenter and Mustafa for unpaid dues way back in the day, and Mustafa said, like, hey, yeah, no, I didn't keep records, so why the hell are you suing me? That's kind of how it comes off of. Not gonna lie, that's how it comes off as. If this guy is taking inappropriate pictures, I don't care what the context is. One, you still need to have written consent, regardless. Like, that's beyond anything else. They should have gotten written consent from the start. Even if I want to say, outside of that, he shouldn't have been taking pictures in the first place, because that's not really his role to take pictures in that case. One, if I'm imagining the circumstances as I'm imagining them, there would have been no reason for him to take pictures in the first place. And even if pictures need to be taken, it's Leon who needed to take those pictures, not him. And that's what it comes down to. So in my opinion, again, I'm not trying to excuse anything that Damien Leon may or may not have done. I'm not trying to excuse his behavior, but there is a part of me that makes me very wary and suspicious about Falcone and his role in the movies of Terrifier, based on the way that he's reacting to some of this stuff based off the documents. I'm not going to deny that. Lawyers for Leon and Falcone have responded and essentially saying that, hey, we're gonna fight this. And this is a gross misrepresentation of our clients and this, that, and the other. Cool. That's an expected response. That's really what this boils down to. I really hope that it does resolve, because I think now people are worried if this is going to affect Terrifier 4. If I'm being honest with you, I don't necessarily think that this will affect Terrifier 4 in the sense that, like, oh, it's going to get delayed or anything like that. In all fairness, I don't think Terrifier 4 has a release date as is, or even, I don't even think it's started filming in the first place. So there's that too. There's nothing to delay, unless there's like some news I missed that's already filming. There's nothing to delay at the moment, so they could focus on this court case for all they want. I mean, I guess if the court case takes too long, I guess it could delay in that sense, so take that for what you will. But as it stands, I don't think there's anything to delay in the first place. I think it's just been announced, and that's about it, you know? If anything, it's probably some pre-production. So I don't really think it's going to affect Terrifier 4 that much. The only thing I think it should affect is Falcone's role. Like, should he still be involved in these movies? That's really what it comes down to. So that's really it. I hope it does resolve itself, because that's the other thing. Like, it's tough coming up with a lawsuit and bringing it to court and having now people ridicule you. There's been many lawsuits in the past couple years. Of course, there's Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, and the past few years we also have the whole Blake Lively versus Baldoni situation, which I've lost track about that lawsuit a long time ago. Which honestly, it seems like both parties are at fault in some degree, whatever degree, I don't know, because I haven't kept up with it since like its origins. But that's neither here nor there. But like, that's the thing. Every time there's a lawsuit in Hollywood, it's kind of a crap show for both parties, realistically speaking, because both of them look bad to a certain extent. And it's just who's the victor at the end of this lawsuit. I do think that Cochran, she has a leg to stand on based on several factors. Again, because for the payback stuff, the payment, the royalty stuff, because it says that she deserves 1% of the profits from Android related to the Terrifier motion picture and any future Terrifier motion pictures, as well as the 1% of the profits from any Terrifier related merchandise. I think that line alone is a slam dunk case in that she should have gotten way more than just $8,000. I feel like she's probably owed way more. She's probably owed like maybe $800,000. I think if anything, the $8,000, that's probably a 1% of the actual amount she's owed, if I'm being honest with you. So there's that too. And then just the new consent of it all. Again, had it not been for the actual hellish filming conditions, I think that's something that could have been blown over very easily. Because, I mean, she still agreed to be in film. She still gave a verbal agreement. So she still agreed in some respects. It just comes down to the fact that they need to have a written consent. And again, had the filming conditions not been such absolute hell, that's something that I genuinely think could have been blown over. I hope she gets her proper dues. From what it seems like, and from what I've heard from other people who have worked on the other Terrifying movies, Damien Leone, he seems to have, like, if this is how he acted, let's say 10 years ago, and him not caring about how the filming is done and being a bit sloppy and into how things are done. This is Terrifier 1. it seems from Terrifier 2 and Terrifier 3 that this is something that he's greatly improved on. He does take care of his actors more, and part of it could just be due to the larger budget. It's one of those things that other cast members have commented on, like, hey, he's a great guy to work with. He's really fun. He's great to work with. He takes care of us, this and the other. So that this may have just been a Terrifier 1 issue per se, because it doesn't seem to have followed into Terrifier 2 and Terrifier 3. Like I said before, Terrifier 3, they had an intimacy coordinator for the bathroom scene. So it is something that he does seem to take seriously, or at least has subsequently seem to have taken seriously. I'll be honest, I haven't heard anybody really comment on Falcone at all. That also kind of gives me some pause on him as a person and as a business partner and film partner. I don't know, the Falcone stuff just seems very off, and I would, if I was Damien Leone, I would like seriously consider what my partnership is with this guy. Again, I'll say this much: if this was just a Terrifier 1 issue, then sure. But if this is also a Terrifier 2 and Terrifier 3 issue, then that's something that I if I was Leone, I would start looking into more. Because even with this, even with him not keeping proper records, that alone is a red flag. Let alone him taking pictures when he shouldn't be taking pictures. That's an even bigger red flag. Yeah, it's just a messy situation, and you hate to see it. It's the reality of the situation. It sucks. I'm not gonna deny it sucks. I hope Cochran, she gets her proper dues. Leone, I hope he's learned from this. Falcone, I hope he's learned from this. And again, I really just hope she gets her proper dues. And that's really what it comes down to. So yeah, what are your thoughts on all this? Comments all that down below, let me know. And that's basically it for now. This is Daniel Mart signing off.